Hi everyone. So we are doing Ink and Eerie Tales this month as our theme, and what I wanted to do was to just share some of my books that I have, kind of spooky ghost stories or kind of things related to kind of this time of the year, Halloween, because I thought you might quite like to see some of the books that I have, and it's also a really nice opportunity for me to get some things off the shelf, because you know what it's like, you buy a book, you might read it, put it back, and then you kind of discover these books again. So it's a really nice way of discovering books that I've had for a while. So I've just picked three that I've got. I had so many, and it was quite hard to whittle down. But what I might do is just link to some of the others in here anyway that I think you might like. So these are generally most of my books are children's books. I think I've said this before. I do have some like novels and adult novels and non-fiction, but yeah, a lot of the books I've always been a huge fan of children's books, and also as an adult. So I do collect a lot of children's books, but these definitely have crossover appeal. So I mean, they are perfect for adults. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who subscribe or who are watching this who wholeheartedly agree that children's books are just as perfect for adults, if not even more perfect, because we can all relate to things that are the themes and things that are in them. And also really appreciate the artwork, because so many children's books are illustrated and have the most incredible artwork, so you can appreciate them as an art form as well. So yeah, we'll do, just dive in. So I've got three books here, and I'm just going to go through them one by one. So I've got one which is, it's basically a collection of stories, one which is more of a graphic novel, and one which is kind of, I suppose, is it picture book? Is it not picture book? But anyway, I'll let you decide. So the first one is The Skull by Jon Klassen, fantastic, extraordinary illustrator and writer that is Jon Klassen. And it's based on a folktale, and this one came out last year, so 2023, and this is the hardback version. And I think, I think the cover is what did it for me. Like spooky, creepy girls holding in the snow next to a tree, holding a skull. I mean, what's not to love about that? So the first book we're looking at is A Skull by Jon Klassen. And I just wanted to show some of the illustrations in a little bit more detail, because it was probably a bit hard to see, like get close to the screen. So yeah, I think it's based on a folktale, which on its own is probably a bit strange, but it's really brought to life by his illustrations. And he's made it like a very heartwarming story. And he's had this character of the little girl who becomes friends with basically a skull. It's an unlikely friendship, but somehow in his hands it works really well. I love these chapter headings, little preludes into like what we might expect. And it's fairly, minimal text as well. But he creates a fantastic sense of place and atmosphere. It really feels cold. I think so much is that to do with how the tonal values of how he kind of creates his work. The colour palette, the really limited colour palette. And if you follow him he's on Substack actually, on an Instagram, and I did see a post where he was sharing how he made, when he was coming up with the scenes and he wanted to try and illustrate these scenes that he had in his head, he actually created them in a 3D form out of Lego, and little Lego figures, because he couldn't quite he needs to get the lighting right. So he did that, and I'll link to that in this post. But it's a really interesting way of kind of building that world and figuring out the lighting and the effects. I know some people do that with like maquettes, and I've done it before where I've made something so I could draw it, because otherwise it's really hard to get that when you're doing something that involves maybe lots of layers and perspectives. Sometimes you just need to make it out of a 3D material and then draw it. But that's I think the idea of using Lego was inspired. And yeah, I think it's a beautiful story. It's very, you'll say, heartwarming, very strange, but it just works so well. I love all the textures that he uses. It really makes it, it's very, very quite simple forms and simple, yeah, they're not detailed illustrations, but he brings across so much in this limited palette, and the use of negative space works really well. And then adding in these little glows of light really brings it all to life. And then it gets a bit kind of scary when the skeleton wants his skull back. But yeah, these little heartwarming kind of moments here. Yeah, so it's a really beautiful book, and that's one I would highly recommend for any time of the year. So the next book is Thornhill by Pam Smy, one of my absolute favourite all-time author illustrators. Very beautiful graphic novel kind of style. Again, it doesn't really fit a category. It's a mixture of so you've got some bit where it's just a lot of text because there's like diary entries, and then it moves to just a whole lots of quite big wordless sections, depending on how the story is being the perspective of the narrator. So part of it is narrated through diary entries, and part of it is through this basically these fantastic scenes. And yeah, it's one of those books that when I saw it again, I thought, yeah, this is right up my street. I mean, it's just the most atmospheric, beautiful. I'm going to say graphic novel. Again, I don't know. I think it'd probably be more of a kind of young adult, teen upwards. Again, adults would very, very much appreciate this. So yeah, this is my second book that I'm recommending. Pam Smy does also had another one which I've got on my shelf. Where is it? Somewhere on this one here, called Hideaway. Oh, actually, it might be on my chair. Called Hideaway, and that's another kind of spooky story, ghost story, but they always have like really quite poignant and powerful underlying themes as well. So I will recommend that as well underneath in this post along with this one. But I will just show you some of these pages and just kind of show you how she uses these kind of breaks in the narrative and the narrator, and how and the detail that she puts into her drawings, and how so beautifully observed everything is in her own way, in very much her own style. There's so much to love about these books, so I will just share some of this in a bit more detail with you now. So the second book I'm recommending is Thornhill by Pam Smy, and like I said, it's more of a graphic novel. It's very chunky, and it's got painted edges, black, really lovely. And I mean, Pam Smy, I say, is one of my favourite illustrator authors. I think I just relate really well to the types of stories that she writes and where she comes from and the themes that she looks at, often to do with loss and friendship, and yeah, just the most beautiful black and white illustrations. And this book is it's based on Thornhill is was an orphanage that now is derelict. So when this character arrives at the beginning, called, I think it's Ella, let's check, I think it's Ella or Ellie. It's basically a derelict building, and it's opposite her new house that she's just moved into. Yeah, I think it's Ella. And then she's somehow drawn to this building. She's kind of feels a need to explore it. She thinks she sees somebody in the building, and she feels the need to discover more about its history and what happened. but kind of through that she kind of risks losing herself to the power of the house. So the house has got this power, down to because of the history of the house and who lived there. So yeah, it's quite it's quite very dark. It's not for young children at all, but yeah, it's very powerful, and it's told in this kind of dual narrative. So you've got diary entries here from the girl who used to live in the house. He was one of the orphans from the orphanage, and it goes between that and then wordless images. So there's just these images here, which focuses on Ella's perspective. So it goes like a bit of a time jump. So this is like 2017, and then the diary entries of the girl is from 1982. So that's how the story is told, which I find really fascinating. It's such an unusual way of telling a story. And then in between you've also got, which I find amazing, just these blank pages, which gives you that kind of space to just pause, and then it goes back into time, back to the diary entry. So yeah, so much going on with this book. It's just so well crafted, so well put together. Yeah, the atmosphere obviously that is created throughout is stunning. And I think, yeah, it's these really well observed details that Pam Smy does. Like, you can tell that she's gone to her house, or she's looked at and just done loads of drawings of old buildings boarded up. You can tell that she will have spent time studying, you know, how someone holds a plate. All of these things, like, it's just so well observed. You know, she will have, the way that she does things at different angles to give a bit more drama. There's just so much going on in this. Yeah, there's so much. I mean, buildings, rain, weather, just, yeah, so it's such a such an accomplished book. Yeah, so this is definitely one to probably not read with children unless you've got older children, but it is one of my recommendations, and it's one of my most loved books. And I did mention she has there's another one called Hideaway, which I'll link in here, which is kind of a follow-up, but it's similar-ish style. Yeah, so that's the second one, Thornhill. And the third book I'm going to share with you is this one, which I've had for a few years now, quite a few years actually, Uncle Montague's Tales of Terror by Chris Priestley and illustrated by the fabulous David Roberts. It's so good, and it's genuinely, I think it's someone who said that, genuinely spooky. It's genuinely quite frightening. There's some really creepy stories in there, like that make you feel like, that make you kind of go, oh my god. So I'm not someone who loves really scary stuff, like stories, like really like gory horror or really terrifying films, but this is like kind of the most I could probably cope with in a book. But it's done so well because it's broken up. There's also like real dark humour in this. So if you know Chris Priestley's work, like, he's a fantastic illustrator and artist as well. He's based, I think, he's in Cambridge. He's got a very dark sense of humour, and it comes through so well. And Roberts' illustrations just work so perfectly, and just make it a bit more palatable because of the illustration. So it's not heavily illustrated, but it has really fantastic chapter headings, which I did mention when we did our Eerie alphabet drawing session. It was something that inspired me to do that session. But yeah, so as Edgar is this little boy who goes to visit his Uncle Montague, this kind of shadowy figure who tells him stories, dark stories, and it's got a real Edward Gorey kind of feel to it. And there's just not a huge amount of illustrations, but there's just some just dotted throughout, so you want to get the sense of like how some quite frightening things happening, and some of the expressions, and it's really genuinely quite frightening. But I will go through some of the illustrations in a little bit more detail, and I'll film a bit more close up for you. And then, yes, my third one is by Chris Priestley, illustrated by David Roberts, Uncle Montague's Tales of Terror. And you've got this character here, Edgar, who goes to his Uncle Montague's house and listens to his for tea, and then listens to all of his terrifying stories. And although Edgar is terrified and kind of part of him doesn't want to go, he's just pulled in because he obviously loves being scared. And I think is that kind of drawing on the idea that some people just, it's that not wanting to be scared, but that's that thrill of exhilaration of being frightened. People keep coming back to that. This is why people watch, you know, really scary movies or go to these kind of fright events where they just get being scared all the time by people in costumes. But yeah, this is there's some genuinely quite frightening stories in here. I'm trying to think. I think winter pruning in particular is quite. Oh, this actually gives me chills. But yeah, I love the chapter headers that David Roberts creates. His beautiful pen and ink work. And some of the illustrations as well. See if I can find a good one. I mean, they're all just very evocative, spooky, like this, you know, quite minimal. Like your imagination is having to do quite a lot of work in this to fill in those gaps of what's happening, which is just fabulous. So it has that real Edward Gorey kind of feel to it because of that. And see what else is in here. So again, really interesting chapter headers. I think, yeah, so this is one that I mentioned. It was kind of one of the illustration that inspired the Eerie alphabet session. Just these little hints at what might be happening in the story with these little vignettes, which is great. You see, it almost got this like Cheshire style cat figure up here. And just things like the shadows, just, yeah, there's just so much going on here, but it's like, it's what you're not seeing is what's making it even more frightening. So they go together so well, but he has got others as well. He's got Tales of Terror from the Black Ship, Tales of Terror from the Tunnel's Mouth. But yeah, I highly recommend to seek this one out if you like ghost stories. There's some really spooky ones in here. So this is just a little mini recommendation. If you can find it. It is very funny and silly, but it is just because I grew up with Korky Paul's illustrations, and I just, yeah, Winnie the Witch was a huge favourite. So and yeah, it really got me into illustration, so I thought I'd just add that one in at the end. Never Say Boo to a Ghost and Other Haunting Rhymes. And this one I've had for quite a while. Like I said, I grew up with Korky Paul's work, loved his illustrations, loved Winnie the Witch, and yeah, and it's the same kind of really delightful, darkly comical illustrations, quite kind of frantic, scratchy line work. And there's just lots of poems here about ghosts and ghouls and demons and headless horsemen and werewolves. It's very fun. And this one here I thought was quite fun. I'll just read this one to you. And it's called Locking Up. A frail old woman lived by herself, as jittery as a mouse. When darkness fell, she locked all locks in her rickety, rambling house. She bolted bolts and hooked all hooks, no window left unshut. She checked and rechecked 20 times to be quite certain, but what was that? Close to her ear, a whisper, faint and thin. Nobody here but a phantom voice. Now we're both locked in. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful Halloween. Bye.